Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Two Hearts Unlikely Heroes from the Two Hearts Wounded Warrior Romance, Book 9 by Tamara Ferguson, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Prologue, Iraq, July 2017. Riding in the munitions supply truck along with 4 other members of her team, Air Force Lieutenant Samantha Caldwell was becoming uneasy. Something wasn't right about the way this mission was unfolding. The intel provided had guaranteed some suspected ISIS members as well as other insurgents were contained in another quadrant. So why was she worried? As they drove toward the camp where the weapons were supposed to be delivered, Sam saw the designated rendezvous point was in a shambles and realized something had gone terribly wrong. One minute she was glancing at the driver as he suddenly slowed down, and the next minute, catastrophe struck. Weapons drawn, a group of men appearing to be terrorists had the truck surrounded before anyone inside the vehicle was even able to take aim. Sam watched in horror as the captain, who was up front in the passenger seat, held up his rifle and was efficiently shot in the head. Judging by the fancier headpiece and slightly more decorative garments he was wearing, the man who'd just killed Captain Denton appeared to be the leader of the group. It was a trap, and the driver, who'd been a last-minute replacement, was obviously in on it. After dropping off some of the weapons, their unit would have been on their way to set up a makeshift airbase in another location. Sam was trying to get her head around the fact that their mission had been compromised, and as the senior officer, now it was up to her to control the situation as effectively as possible. "Put down your weapons," she ordered the members of her unit, laying hers down. "I don't want anyone else killed." Although she'd had some trouble with one airman in particular, who seemed to have trouble taking orders from a woman, the remaining airmen followed her directive despite appearing somewhat mutinous. But there was a reason she wanted her team to seem cooperative, and when she stared them down, they definitely realized she had a plan in mind. They were left with 3 terrorists still holding weapons, while another 3 walked off, one of them signaling for a truck which quickly appeared from behind a rock formation located beside the road. The men loaded on into the truck and were driven off, more than likely on their way to stop the other supply truck following about 10 minutes behind. How had they known about the weapons transports? 2 of the 3 men who remained gathered her team's weapons as they made their way inside the back of the truck, while the leader joined the driver in front. Whatever organization was behind this attack must have needed these weapons badly, since the men failed to search the members of her unit for other weapons, which might have been hidden from sight. But sudden moves and stray gunfire could blow them all up, and the men were obviously waiting to reach their destination before taking care of them, and any other weapons they may have on hand, which would more than likely mean all of her team would be shot once they were forced to abandon the truck. They rode along in silence for another 20 minutes while Sam watched and waited for the right time to make a move as the 2 men continued holding their rifles steady. Finally, the truck had to make a detour, and the driver slowed down in an effort to avoid the deep, wide hole in the middle of the road where a bomb must have recently exploded. Sam noticed both men sitting with them in back, letting their guards down, watching the wheels spinning beneath them under the truck as the driver tried to maneuver the narrow road. She pointed at Morgan with a discreet nod of her head toward the driver, who he was sitting behind. Johnson knew what to do since he was near the passenger seat. That left Bardwell, who was settled across from Sam. They all moved at once, Sam stabbing the terrorist beside her with the dagger she had kept sheathed inside her pants pocket, grabbing his rifle while Bardwell shoved the weapon held on him, making sure it was aimed upward when it shot off, and then knocking the guy unconscious. Morgan and Johnson had taken care of the men in front at the same time, the driver, having been clubbed by the Beretta Morgan, had tucked into his waistband, while Johnson had simply punched the leader in the face since he'd laid his rifle aside. All they needed to do now was escape the truck. "Go!" Sam yelled as each of them scrambled for the truck. "Unless you manage to grab a rifle, make sure you get ahead of me and stay out of sight." Everyone, including Sam, began to run. Sam held up the rifle she'd managed to snatch from the terrorist she stabbed, aiming at the munitions truck. But just as she sent off the shot, she felt a jarring pain in her calf and realized as she missed her mark, someone was standing and shooting from his position in the passenger seat. It was the same man who'd shot the captain. She'd managed to get off another shot, this time hitting her target. Before she could drop to the ground, the impetus of the explosion thrust her back against the face of the rocks edging the side of the road. There seemed to be an enormous amount of blood oozing from her leg, she thought, feeling dazed and looking at her leg from where she lay flattened against the rock. She must have been hurt much, much worse than she'd thought. And then Sam passed out. A few miles away. Their mission had been compromised, and 2 more units were supposedly headed into a trap. Hopefully, they wouldn't be too late. Lieutenant Benjamin Nash thought to himself, speeding in his jeep along the road before veering off, taking a shortcut across the dusty terrain leading to the prearranged munitions drop. What was left of his unit would be following shortly after securing a few prisoners who'd survived the attack. Ben had been briefed on the entire mission after making contact with command. Suddenly, an explosion erupted somewhere ahead of him, and even though he didn't know who or what he would find once he reached the site, Ben kept on driving. About another 10 minutes later, Ben came upon the remains of what appeared to be one of their munitions supply trucks. Driving past, he was relieved to see that it looked like the explosion had been massive, which more than likely meant their weapons hadn't gotten into the hands of the enemy. Someone had done their job and destroyed the truck. It was too dangerous to move closer, so Ben kept following the road. Had anyone survived? As he slowed down, scoping the area for any signs of life, Ben came upon someone lying beside the road. Friend or foe, whoever it was appeared to be critically wounded. Ben stopped the jeep, stepping out and grabbing his rifle. It was a woman in uniform, Ben realized, kneeling beside her and laying his fingers on her wrist. Realizing her pulse was strong, Ben put down the rifle, pulling his t-shirt off quickly and ripping it into strips. 2 men crept out from behind the rocks, one of them cussing up a storm, luckily in English, since Ben had his rifle targeting them in a heartbeat. "I'm Lieutenant Nash," Ben stated, noting their uniforms and putting his rifle back down, attempting to aid the woman. "Airmen Bardwell and Morgan, sir. We were on our way to set up base in a new location," one of them replied. "What can we do, sir?" Morgan asked, while Bardwell leant down beside Ben, helping him apply pressure while Ben began wrapping the woman's leg. "Radio in," Ben said. "Get a chopper here." While Bardwell assisted Ben with wrapping her leg, Morgan finally got a hold of someone on the radio and was told that help would be arriving shortly. "Did all of you make it?" Ben asked as he finished tying off the woman's leg. "Most of us, sir," Bardwell answered. "Captain Denton was shot in the head, and Airman Johnson is missing." "There were 3 more men who stopped us," Morgan said. "We think they were probably going after the other truck, which was running about 15 minutes behind." "You're probably right," Ben muttered grimly. "They seem to be covering the roads from the south. Since there's nothing else to be done here, I want the 2 of you to take the jeep and head west, back to the safe zone." "But, sir," Bardwell responded. "That's an order," Ben growled. "I'll wait for the chopper, but before you leave, tell me quickly what happened." The 2 men took turns describing the situation they'd found themselves in after being hijacked. "Geez, she was something, Lieutenant. She was so calm and cool after the captain was shot. I thought that her being a woman—" Morgan grimaced. "Well, let's just say I've always been kind of a sexist and leave it at that." "She pretty much saved our lives." Airman Bardwell looked sheepish. "She must have been one step ahead of us from the beginning and was planning to blow up the truck because she grabbed his rifle after knifing the guy. The rest of us were just thinking about escape. We gave her kind of a hard time when she told us to put down our weapons when the captain was shot." Ben said, "It's not the first time that the enemy has underestimated a woman, especially here in the Middle East. She must have understood that even before accepting this assignment." "Well, I'm sure not underestimating any woman anymore," Morgan replied, stepping into the jeep. Strangely, Ben smiled wryly, watching them drive off. Plus, he realized he'd forgotten to ask for the name of the injured woman. When the woman began to stir, Ben once again became concerned. The blood still seemed to be seeping through the wrapping around her legs, so he tightened it more. Her eyes opened and she stared at him blankly. It was then that he noticed how beautiful she was, with sapphire blue eyes and silky amber hair cropped short. She had the face of an angel. "Holy crap, where did that thought come from?" Ben murmured. "Hold on, don't you die on me." Her eyes suddenly closed and she seemed to be falling into a deep sleep. Finally, he heard the roar of the chopper as it approached. It really hadn't been that long, Ben realized, checking his watch while the pilot searched for a level place to land. Lifting her into his arms, Ben approached the chopper and moments later laid her onto the gurney set up inside. Suddenly, Ben heard gunfire ring out as someone began shooting at them with a rifle. Ben wasn't sure if it was the 3 insurgents who'd set out to hijack the second munitions truck or someone else. Gunfire seemed to be coming from only one weapon, he realized as he went to pull the strap of his own rifle from over his shoulder, so he was able to strike back. He got off a few rounds before he realized his arm had been hit and that he was bleeding badly himself. Shit, he muttered, getting a sight of his shattered left forearm. The chopper pilot yelled out, "Get your butt aboard, sir." As Ben climbed aboard, he wondered if he'd actually hit his mark since the gunfire hadn't been returned. After checking the woman first, the medic inside the chopper worked to stop the bleeding of his arm while they made it safely into the air. Chapter 1. Quantico, Virginia, present day. "Colonel," Ben said, saluting. "It's good to see you again." "Sit down, Captain Nash," responded Colonel Quentin Pierce. "How is everything going with your rehab?" "Good, sir," Ben answered. I've just finished my final session, and I've been approved for officially returning to active duty." "That's actually why I wanted to see you here today," the colonel said. "How would you like to start working for Air Force Special Intelligence?" Ben blinked. "Truthfully, I hadn't really thought about it. What made you think of me?" "I've been keeping an eye on you for a while now, ever since that mission went wrong in Iraq," Colonel Pierce answered. "If it hadn't been for your quick thinking, there would have been a hell of a lot more casualties than there were that day." "I take it you have something specific you wanted me to handle?" Ben asked, "particularly since my last session with the shrink was this morning." "You've got it," the colonel muttered, handing over a file folder. "And I think when you see what the mission is, you'll want to be included in the takedown." Ben opened the file and began thumbing through the pages. Inside was a complete list of the munitions and supplies that had somehow ended up in the hands of terrorists overseas during the past 3 years. Stunned, Ben looked up at the colonel. How in the hell were so many weapons confiscated by our enemies? As you can see, that list only goes back for 3 years. There's always been a certain amount of time elapsing between each attack. And the locations are spread widely, I've noticed. None of the units were targeted in the same general location more than once, Ben stated. Actually, that was the giveaway, the colonel growled. If one terrorist organization was responsible, these attacks would have been occurring in the same general locations. Instead, each attack has occurred hundreds of miles away from the others, and whoever's behind them doesn't target any specific branch of the military. And they don't leave survivors, Ben replied, studying the file again. Kidnapping Americans would draw too much attention to what they obviously intend to keep doing. Exactly, the colonel answered. This must be a highly skilled organization because someone infiltrating each branch of the military would have to have a top-level security clearance to be able to feed covert information like this to terrorists and insurgents. Someone inside each branch has to be allowing access through security firewalls. You're thinking it's a hacker who's getting a hold of intel? Ben asked. We do, Colonel Pierce answered. In fact, we believe that the head or heads of the organization could be hackers, and he or she is either manipulating specific personnel by blackmail or threats, because there's such a large profit to be made if the weapons are going to the highest bidder, or these individuals just can't resist the extraordinary amount of money to be made. Ben nodded his head in agreement. I don't think it's anyone who's dedicated to any one specific terrorist organization. Otherwise, they wouldn't be distributed the way they are, which more than likely is to the highest bidder. It has to be someone who just doesn't give a damn about anyone but himself. Agreed, the colonel admitted. Ben asked, So what do you need me for, Colonel? I'm moderately tech-savvy, but I'd be of better use in action. And that's exactly what we're going to need from you. It's kind of a delicate situation, Colonel Pierce heaved a sigh. As you've probably realized, we've been on this for several months now, and we've discovered some viable suspects. We're working jointly with other government agencies on this, but since we have no legitimate evidence to prove any of our suspects is guilty, I've convinced my superiors that rather than go in and question anyone, we send in some agents undercover. Since one of the likely suspects is former Air Force, we've been given the lead, at least for now. Ben was leery at hearing the word agents. It sounded like he was going to be assigned a partner, but he definitely wanted in. What have you got in mind? Colonel Pierce replied, I think you've realized we want to use a team to try and infiltrate the organization. We think a man and woman working as partners will relate better since it appears that our two suspects, a man and woman, might play an equal part in carrying out the plans. The colonel continued, Before we go into any more detail about who we're investigating and how we're going to handle it, I'd like you to find yourself a female partner. I've given you a list of names of women to consider. Although it doesn't have to be someone from the list, it does have to be someone who's one of us. But the important thing to remember is whoever you choose, you need to be able to work well together. It might prove to be an ongoing partnership. Ben grimaced, glancing at the prosthetic on his missing left forearm and hand. That might be easier said than done. Or not, the colonel answered. That's part of the reason I chose you. Ben blinked. The man we're investigating was wounded but has a beef with us because he was dishonorably discharged, and the government wouldn't pick up his medical expenses. I won't go into detail, but let's just say he had a problem with authority, which led to unnecessary lives being lost in Iraq. He was actually lucky not to be court-martialed. Ben nodded his head in agreement. Okay, Colonel. What's the target time for this mission? 6 weeks, he answered. Puzzled, Ben had held the colonel's gaze. Why so long? I want you to go through a Wounded Warrior active duty retraining program. It's important that you're in top physical condition, especially since we know for a fact that these two are. Depending on what we discover, infiltrating this organization could require traveling into some dangerous territories overseas. All right, sir, I can do that, Ben answered. What's my timeline and itinerary? This week, I'd like you to visit the air bases where these women are stationed. Hopefully, you'll find one you feel you can work with, because we'll send both of you to hundreds of patients military program. We'll send both of you to retrain while you get to know each other better, which will aid in playing your parts. Next week, you'll begin the retraining program where we would like you to train for about a month, and we'll use the final week to brief you on this couple's history and movements. Where am I going to retrain? Ben asked. Crystal Rock. That's a town in Wisconsin. There's a new Wounded Warrior home located there. They just began the retraining program last year, and it's been a big success. Statistically, more Wounded Warriors who have participated in their program are eventually returning to active duty compared to other training camps, which have been set up for the same purpose. The colonel pursed his lips. You'll be entering as an airman, so your rank doesn't draw any unnecessary attention. We want for you to be as forgettable as possible while you're retraining. All right, sir, Ben responded. One thing. We don't see how it can possibly be related to what's happening with the munitions thefts overseas, but there's been talk that someone in Crystal Rock at the Wounded Warrior home could be in danger. So keep an eye out, will you? It's impossible to hazard a guess as to who or why someone might be targeted with the hundreds of patients, military personnel, and veterans who go through the program every few months. But as long as you're going to be there, I'd be happy to make the rounds and do what I can while I'm there, Ben answered. I'd appreciate that, the colonel said. When Colonel Pierce stood, Ben stood too, reaching out to shake his hand. As Ben was dismissed and turned toward the doorway, the colonel spoke again. By the way, Captain, the woman you rescued in Iraq, I've heard you've been making inquiries about her, and since she's being considered for work as an agent who might work covertly for us in the future, I can't reveal to you where she is or what she's doing, but I just wanted to reassure you she's active and well. Ben blinked. Despite the missing leg? The colonel nodded and smiled. She's a fighter. Ben grinned. Thank you for letting me know, sir. For some reason, it's been gnawing away at me, and I haven't been able to quit thinking about her. I understand, Colonel Pierce answered. I was involved in a situation very similar to yours when I was in Afghanistan. I'll be in touch as soon as I can, Colonel, Ben grimaced. Finding a woman to work with might be the most difficult part of the mission. The colonel blinked, and then he began to laugh.